hospital corridor was silent until the sharp wail of a baby cut through the air, startling Emma, who clutched her coat tighter. A nurse stepped out of the dim room, whispering a name that made Emma freeze. Emma said, "That cannot be true, you are mistaken." The nurse looked pale, eyes darting as if she had seen a ghost, insisting softly, "Emma, the child belongs to you." The words spun inside her head like broken glass, each shard cutting deeper into her denial. In the corner of the waiting room, Daniel entered, his voice trembling as he asked, "What child? Who are you talking about?" His face turned ashen when the nurse met his eyes with quiet certainty. Daniel said, "This is madness. I was never told of a child." The hallway's fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering as if they too carried the weight of the revelation. Emma staggered, gripping the cold wall for support, whispering, "No, this is not mine. You cannot make me accept this." The baby's cry rose again, relentless, filling the sterile air with a haunting presence that no one could ignore. By the end, Emma's whisper broke into a gasp, a denial shattering into silence. Emma sat rigid on the wooden chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrest. Daniel paced in front of her, each step a loud reminder of the storm they were trapped in. Daniel said, "Why would they say such a thing, Emma?" His voice cracked, disbelief sharpening into anger. Emma closed her eyes, whispering, "Because lies have a way of finding me." The nurse lingered near the doorway, shoulders tense, avoiding their gaze as though holding more than she dared to share. The baby's muffled cries seeped through the thin walls, a sound impossible to silence. Emma lowered her head, muttering, "They cannot make this mine, they cannot." Daniel's fists hit the chair, startling her as he said, "If this is true, then someone has been lying to us for years." His words echoed, bouncing between fear and fury. The nurse finally whispered, "Truth was always waiting to be heard, even if it breaks you." Emma's breath shuddered, and she whispered back, "Then let it break me." The courtroom air felt heavier than stone, every whisper silenced when the judge cleared his throat. Emma's chest tightened as Daniel stood beside her, his face pale but unyielding. The lawyer spoke with sharp clarity. "The DNA results confirm this child carries Daniel's bloodline." The room gasped, tension snapping like a whip. Daniel said, "I never knew, no one told me." His voice broke, words like jagged glass tearing at his pride. Emma stared down at her hands, whispering, "They have turned my life into a spectacle." The baby's soft cry filled the air, echoing louder than the judge's gavel. The whispers of the townsfolk felt like daggers stabbing Emma's back, and she muttered, "They are watching. They want me to crumble." Daniel slammed his fist against the table, shouting, "This cannot be how my truth is revealed." The judge's eyes narrowed, voice cold, "Silence, or you will be removed." Emma's breath faltered, the truth already chained to her name. The town square echoed with murmurs as Emma walked through, her head lowered, each step heavier than the last. Daniel followed behind, keeping a few paces back, eyes darting at the villagers, whispering to one another. Emma said, "They look at me as if I am a thief of innocence." Daniel's voice was low. "They do not know truth, only rumors." The outsider stepped forward, Mrs. Green, her sharp eyes piercing, lips curling with disdain. Mrs. Green said, "Shame has found you, Emma, and the town will never forget it." Emma stopped, trembling, replying softly, "Your words weigh nothing compared to the truth I carry." The baby's faint cry silenced the crowd for a moment, eyes widening before whispers doubled. Daniel clenched his jaw, muttering, "Let them talk, but we will not bow." Emma's heart throbbed, tears threatening as she whispered, "But how long before even you turn away?" Emma sat alone by the old church steps, the stone cold beneath her, the bells tolling above like accusations. Daniel lingered in the shadows, hesitant, his face torn between guilt and rage. Emma whispered, "Why must I carry what I never chose?" Daniel stepped forward, voice low, "Because fate does not ask what we want." She looked at him, eyes red, saying, "Then I will deny it until my last breath." Daniel's voice cracked. "Denial will not silence truth, Emma, it only drowns you." Her hands trembled as she covered her face, whispering, "Then let me drown." The baby's cry echoed faintly from afar, carried by the wind, as though destiny mocked her every word. The night air grew colder, shadows stretching long across the square, and Emma finally muttered, "They will never let me forget." Daniel stood still, silent, the distance between them wider than any truth could mend. Emma sat at the edge of her bed, her body trembling as the night pressed in like a suffocating weight. The baby's cry lingered in her ears, even though the child was not near her now. Emma said, "Why does the sound not leave me? Why does it cling to my bones?" Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes filled with questions he could not voice. His silence was louder than any scream. Emma whispered, "You think I am broken, but I was broken long before this child came to me." Daniel finally muttered, "I do not think you are broken, Emma. I think you are terrified." Her face twisted with anger and grief as she snapped, "Terrified is not enough to explain what I feel." The lamp on the nightstand flickered, shadows stretching across the walls like ghosts of her past. Emma pressed her hands against her face, whispering, "I cannot carry another's mistakes." Daniel's voice lowered, "Then carry your own truth, because running will never silence it." Emma walked into her mother's kitchen, the familiar smell of bread baking offering no comfort. Her mother, Margaret, stood at the counter, her hands kneading dough with stern precision. Margaret said, "I warned you that shame would find you, Emma." Emma lowered her gaze, whispering, "This shame was never mine to begin with." Margaret's hands slammed the dough, flour scattering into the air like dust from old wounds. Margaret hissed, "Do not twist words. A child does not appear from thin air." Emma's breath trembled, her voice low. "Do you even care how much this breaks me?" Margaret's eyes hardened, her reply cold, "What matters is how it breaks this family." Emma staggered back, the warmth of the kitchen twisting into a prison of judgment. Her chest heaved, her words cracking. "You never once asked if I wanted this life." Margaret's jaw tightened, and she whispered bitterly, "Want has nothing to do with it." Daniel sat alone at the bar, the glass of whiskey untouched before him. The bartender wiped down the counter, offering a look that carried more judgment than kindness. Daniel whispered, "I never asked for this, yet they call me father." His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, hollow eyes staring back. A man beside him muttered, "The whole town knows now, Daniel, there's no hiding." Daniel snapped, "Let them talk, they know nothing of truth." The man smirked, shaking his head, "Truth does not matter when gossip is louder." Daniel slammed his fist against the bar, the glass rattling, whiskey spilling like bitter tears. His chest rose with ragged breaths as he muttered, "I was robbed of choice, and now they chain me to it." The bartender's voice was cold. Choice left the moment that child drew breath. Daniel closed his eyes, whispering, "Then I am already condemned." Emma sat on the park bench, leaves falling around her like whispers of judgment. She cradled the baby in her arms, the child's soft breath steady against her chest. Emma whispered, "You are not mine, yet you hold me captive." A woman passing by glanced at her with suspicion, whispering to another, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Daniel approached slowly, his face worn from sleepless nights, saying, "You cannot hide from them, Emma." Her voice cracked, "I am not hiding. I am drowning in their stares." Daniel sat beside her, his hand brushing the baby's blanket, whispering, "This child is not guilt, Emma, it is truth." She turned to him, anger in her eyes, muttering, "Truth destroyed me long before this child." The baby stirred softly, and Emma closed her eyes, whispering, "Why do I feel chained to what I never wanted?" Daniel lowered his head, saying, "Because chains often look like blood." The night was heavy as Emma walked the empty street, her footsteps echoing against stone walls. Daniel followed a few paces behind, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. Emma said, "I feel as if every door closes before I can breathe." Daniel's voice echoed, "Then we will break doors down if we must." She shook her head, whispering, "You say we, but you do not carry this weight." His steps faltered, his voice softer, "I carry it differently, Emma, but I carry it." Emma stopped under the streetlight, its glow washing her face in pale gold. She whispered, The child is both curse and salvation, and I do not know which one to believe." Daniel stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Perhaps it is both, and perhaps that is why it matters." Emma's eyes brimmed with tears as she muttered, "Then let it matter, even if it breaks me." Emma stood in the living room as Daniel's family gathered, their faces heavy with judgment. His father, Richard, glared across the room, saying, "This disgrace will not be carried in our name." Emma's voice trembled. "Disgrace is not a child, it is your shame that you project on me." Daniel's mother, Helen, stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You have broken him, Emma. Do you see what you've done?" Daniel clenched his jaw, fists tight, muttering, "No one asked me if I wanted this truth." Richard slammed his hand on the table, shouting, "Then deny it, make it vanish before it ruins us all." Emma's eyes burned, her words cutting through the tension. "You cannot erase blood with denial." The baby's cry upstairs pierced the silence, reminding them all of what they tried to bury. Daniel whispered, "The cry will always remind us." Helen shook her head, tears forming, whispering, "It will destroy us, all of us." Emma lifted her chin, muttering, "It will only destroy the liars." The town tavern filled with whispers as Emma entered, heads turning like a tide of suspicion. A man at the bar sneered, "That's the woman with the child no one wanted." Emma's steps faltered, but she forced herself forward. Daniel followed close, whispering, "Do not let them break you." Another voice from the corner laughed, "She pretends the baby is not hers, but the town knows better." Emma's chest tightened, but she straightened her back, saying, "Your words cannot define me." The laughter spread like wildfire, cruel and cutting, echoing louder than her courage. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder, muttering, "They will always turn whispers into knives." Emma whispered back, "Then I will bleed before I bow." A glass shattered in the distance, the sound silencing the room for a moment before the whispers grew stronger. Emma's face flushed with anger, tears burning her eyes as she muttered, "They will choke on their lies." Emma sat at Margaret's kitchen table, her mother's eyes cold as stone. Margaret said, "You shame me, Emma. Do you understand what this does to me?" Emma's voice cracked. "It is not about you, Mother. It is about a child that did not choose this." Margaret slammed a dish onto the table, the crash echoing like thunder. She hissed, "You always find ways to wound me. And now you drag this town into our misery." Emma's breath shook as she whispered, "I carry wounds you never wanted to see." Margaret's hands trembled, but her eyes burned with judgment. Daniel entered quietly, voice firm. "This is not Emma's shame to bear alone." Margaret's gaze snapped to him, her tone icy. "And who are you to defend her when you abandoned truth yourself?" Emma's tears spilled, muttering, "I was never enough for you, and now you want me to vanish too." Margaret's silence was sharper than any blade. Daniel stood in the courtroom again, his voice rising as lawyers debated over the child's future. Emma sat silent, her hands shaking in her lap. Daniel shouted, "I will not abandon what carries my blood." The lawyer smirked, saying, "Blood is not enough to make a father." Emma's eyes lifted, her voice soft but steady, "And it is not enough to make me a mother either." The judge leaned forward, his tone sharp. "This case is no longer about choice, it is about responsibility." Emma's tears welled, whispering, "Responsibility that was forced upon me." Daniel's fists tightened as he muttered, "Then let me bear it if she cannot." The crowd stirred, whispers running like fire through the room. The baby's cry echoed faintly, silencing all voices for a moment. Emma lowered her head, whispering, "The cry follows me everywhere." Daniel turned toward her, his face torn, whispering, "It follows me too." Emma stood outside the church, the night air biting against her skin. Villagers gathered nearby, their voices a low murmur of judgment. Mrs. Green approached, her tone cutting, "You will never be free of this stain, Emma." Emma's voice cracked. "It is not a stain, it is a scar I did not choose." Daniel stepped forward, muttering, "Enough. Leave her be." Mrs. Green sneered, "She hides from truth, while the child suffers in whispers." Emma's eyes burned with tears as she whispered, "The child suffers because of your whispers, not mine." The crowd murmured louder, pressing in like shadows ready to consume her. Daniel placed his hand on Emma's shoulder, his voice steady. "You will not stand alone against them." Emma trembled, muttering, "But even with you, the whole town feels heavier than my heart can bear." Mrs. Green smiled coldly, whispering, "Then your heart will break." Emma closed her eyes, whispering, "Let it break, but it will not bend." Emma paced the dim hallway, her hands shaking as the baby's soft cries echoed from the next room. Margaret emerged from the shadows, her face pale, but her eyes burning with guilt. Margaret whispered, "You were never meant to know." Emma froze, whispering, "Know what, Mother? That this child is mine?" Margaret's voice cracked. "The child was never yours, Emma. It is your sister's." The words cut deeper than any knife, stealing Emma's breath. Daniel stepped forward, disbelief in his eyes, saying, "Her sister? You kept this secret from all of us?" Margaret's hands trembled as she muttered, "I thought I was protecting the family." Emma's chest heaved, rage rising, her voice sharp. "You were protecting lies, not us." The hallway felt suffocating, the truth unraveling every thread of trust. Margaret whispered again, "Your sister vanished and I placed her shame upon you." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she muttered, "You broke me to hide her sins." Emma stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger, the baby's cries growing louder upstairs. She shouted, "You made me carry her shame, Mother. You chained me to a life that was never mine." Margaret's lips quivered as she whispered, "I had no choice." Daniel slammed his fist against the mantel, shouting, "There is always a choice, Margaret. You destroyed her with your silence." Emma's breath shook as she muttered, "You turned me into a liar in my own skin." Margaret's tears spilled, her voice breaking. "I thought you were strong enough to bear it." Emma snapped back, "Strong enough to live as a ghost? Strong enough to be hated by all?" Daniel's voice lowered, sharp as steel, "You've poisoned her life to keep your name clean." Margaret dropped her head, whispering, "I only wanted to protect what remained of us." Emma's eyes narrowed, her voice trembling with rage. "You wanted to protect yourself." Daniel confronted Margaret in the silence that followed, his voice low but cutting. He said, "You let me believe this child was mine, yet all along you hid the truth." Margaret's shoulders sagged, whispering, "I thought you would leave if you knew." Emma's chest rose with ragged breaths, whispering, "You made me hate myself when it was never my burden to carry." Margaret sobbed, her voice broken, "I feared the shame would destroy us all." Daniel's fists trembled, muttering, "It has already destroyed us." Emma turned away, pressing her hand to the wall as tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, "I lost my life for a lie." Margaret tried to step forward, reaching out, but Emma pulled back sharply, snapping, "Do not touch me." The house felt heavy, the weight of secrets pressing against every wall. Daniel's voice fell quiet, whispering, "This lie will bury us if we let it." The baby's cry pierced the night as Emma rushed upstairs, her hands trembling as she lifted the child from the crib. Daniel followed, his face pale, whispering, "He carries truth none of us were ready for." Emma pressed the baby close, her voice breaking, "Truth that has ruined me." Margaret stood in the doorway, sobbing, "It was never meant to be yours, Emma. I only wanted to save you." Emma snapped, "Save me? You drowned me in lies." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low, "This child carries innocence, not shame." Emma shook her head, whispering, "Innocence turned to chains in my arms." The baby stirred, his soft breath calming the storm for only a moment. Emma's tears fell onto the blanket as she muttered, "I cannot love him as mine when he was never mine." Margaret whispered desperately, "But you already do, Emma. That's why it matters." The truth hung heavy in the air as Emma stood by the window, the night sky endless above her. She whispered, "I am nothing but a vessel for shame." Daniel moved closer, his voice breaking, "No, Emma, you are the one who kept him alive when no one else would." Margaret's sobs echoed from behind, whispering, "I am the one who failed, not you." Emma's hands trembled on the windowsill, her voice sharp, "Your failure is carved into my soul." Daniel reached for her arm gently, whispering, "Let us not bury ourselves in her sins. The child needs more than the shadow of lies." Emma turned slowly, her eyes red, whispering, "Then what am I to him, Daniel? A lie, a mother, or nothing at all?" Daniel's voice cracked. "You are everything he knows." Emma's tears spilled freely as she muttered, "Then everything he knows is broken." The courtroom roared with tension as Emma stood trembling, clutching the railing before her. The judge's gavel slammed down, echoing like thunder. Emma shouted, "I will not be crushed beneath your lies anymore." Margaret rose suddenly, her face pale, screaming, "It was never meant to be your burden." Daniel's voice cut through. "Then why did you chain her with it?" The lawyer sneered, his voice cold. "This family is drowning in its own secrets, and the law will not clean them away." Emma's hands shook as she cried out, "You stripped me of dignity, you left me hollow." Margaret sobbed, whispering, "I only wanted to protect you." Daniel slammed his hand against the table, muttering, "You protected yourself, not her." The baby's cry echoed from the back of the room, silencing all voices. Emma's tears streamed as she whispered, "His cry will not be erased, just as I will not be erased." Emma faced Margaret in the hallway after the trial, her voice trembling with rage. Emma said, "You destroyed my life to preserve a lie." Margaret clutched her chest, gasping, "I did what I thought was right." Emma shouted, "You thought nothing of me, nothing of the pain you carved into me." Daniel stepped between them, his voice sharp, "You cannot undo what you've done, Margaret." Margaret sobbed, whispering, "I carried this for years, I thought it would fade." Emma's eyes burned, her words cutting. "It faded for you, but it never faded for me." Daniel's voice lowered, "The truth is out, and it burns everyone now." Margaret whispered, "You will hate me forever." Emma's chest heaved as she muttered, "No, hate would mean I still belong to you. Now I am free from you." Margaret crumbled, tears streaking her cheeks as silence swallowed the hallway. The town square filled with villagers as Emma stood on the steps, holding the baby in her arms. Their whispers rose like a storm, sharp and unforgiving. Mrs. Green stepped forward, her voice cruel, "The child is a curse, a stain upon you." Emma's voice cracked but rose, "He is not a curse, he is my proof of survival." Daniel stood beside her, his voice strong, "This town thrives on whispers, but we will not bow to them." The villagers shouted, their voices merging into a wave of judgment. Emma clutched the baby tighter, muttering, "You cannot take from me what I never chose." Mrs. Green sneered, "You never chose, yet you claim him now?" Emma's eyes burned as she cried, "I claim the truth, even if it destroys me." The crowd's anger swelled, but Emma stood unmoving, her tears glistening in the gray light. Daniel whispered, "They cannot break what is already broken." Emma stood in the graveyard at dusk, her hands trembling as she placed flowers on the headstone of her sister. Her whisper broke, "You left me to carry your sins, and I nearly drowned in them." Daniel stood behind her, his voice soft, "She is gone, Emma, but her shadow still grips you." Emma's tears fell as she muttered, "Her shadow stole my life." Margaret approached slowly, her face weary, whispering, "I tried to protect her memory, even if it meant destroying you." Emma turned, her voice sharp, "You destroyed both of us." Daniel's tone hardened, "The grave holds her, but shame holds you." Margaret's eyes filled with grief as she whispered, "I cannot undo what I've done." Emma's voice cracked, "No, you cannot. But I can choose not to let it kill me." The evening wind howled, carrying her words into the night. The confrontation reached its breaking point inside the family's living room. Emma stood in the center, clutching the baby, her tears streaming as she shouted, "No one will ever strip him from my arms." Margaret cried, "You cannot claim him, he was never yours." Emma's voice cracked, "Then why does my heart break every time he cries?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm, "Because love is stronger than truth, Margaret." Margaret screamed, "Love built on lies will not last." Emma's face burned with rage, whispering, "Then let it burn, because I will not let him go." The baby stirred, his soft cry silencing the room. Daniel whispered, "The choice is made, Margaret. Nothing you say can change it." Emma's breath shook, her voice trembling. He is mine even if he breaks me. Margaret collapsed into a chair, her sobs filling the silence as Emma held the child tighter. Emma sat by the window of the quiet house, the morning light spilling across her face. She whispered, "I thought truth would kill me, but it has only left scars." Daniel sat nearby, his voice low. "Scars remind us that we survive." Emma held the baby close, her chest rising with slow breaths. She muttered, "I was never meant to love him, but I do." Daniel's eyes softened, whispering, "Love is not given by blood alone." Margaret entered, her shoulders hunched, voice shaking. "I know forgiveness is too much to ask." Emma's eyes burned with unshed tears, whispering, "Forgiveness is not mine to give, it belongs to him." The baby stirred, his small hand curling around Emma's finger. Daniel said, "He only knows you, Emma. That is his truth." Emma lowered her head, her whisper trembling. "Then I will give him everything, even if I have nothing left." The church bells rang as Emma walked through the empty square, the baby cradled against her chest. Villagers watched from a distance, their whispers muted, their eyes less sharp than before. Daniel walked beside her, his voice quiet. "They look but they no longer pierce." Emma said, "Their stares still burn, but I no longer bow." A child in the crowd pointed at the baby, smiling softly, and the harsh murmurs faded into silence. Emma's voice cracked. "Maybe he is not a curse after all." Daniel whispered, "He never was." The air felt lighter, though the weight of past wounds remained. Emma whispered, "I will carry him forward, even if the world does not follow." Daniel nodded, muttering, "Then I will walk with you." The bells echoed louder, like a fragile promise of renewal. Emma visited her sister's grave once more, flowers trembling in her hands. She whispered, "You left your sins with me, but I will not let them bury me." Daniel stood behind, his voice steady. "This grave does not hold you, Emma. It only holds the past." Margaret appeared slowly, tears streaking her cheeks, whispering, "I see now that silence was never protection." Emma's voice cracked. Silence was the sharpest blade. Margaret fell to her knees, sobbing, "I cannot change what I chose, but I can beg to stand beside you now." Emma's tears fell onto the flowers as she whispered, "I cannot promise forgiveness, but I can promise truth." Daniel said, "Truth is enough. It is the only ground we have left." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the weight of silence. The baby slept quietly in Emma's arms as she sat by the fire, the warmth flickering against her pale face. Daniel placed wood onto the flames, his voice gentle, "He is safe here with us." Emma whispered, "Safe does not mean whole, but maybe it is enough." Margaret sat across the room, her voice low. "I will not ask you to love me again, but I will help however you allow." Emma's eyes glistened, whispering, "Love is not built in a day, and you broke it in years." Margaret's tears fell silently, her voice trembling. "Then I will spend the rest of my years mending what I can." Daniel's hand rested on Emma's shoulder, whispering, "We build forward, not back." Emma lowered her head, whispering, "Forward feels fragile, but maybe fragile is enough for now." The night was still as Emma stood outside, the baby asleep in her arms, the stars scattered above like silent witnesses. Daniel stood close, his voice soft, "You carried storms, yet here you are still standing." Emma whispered, "I am scarred, but I am still standing." Margaret stepped out slowly, her voice heavy. "The scars will never fade, but they will remind us of truth." Emma looked at the baby's face, whispering, "He deserves more than scars, he deserves love." Daniel's voice cracked, "And he will have it, because you gave it even when you thought you couldn't." Emma's tears fell onto the child's blanket as she muttered, "Then maybe love is stronger than every lie." Margaret lowered her head, whispering, "I pray it is." The wind carried their silence as Emma whispered, "This is not the end, but it is a beginning." The town square was silent under the gray dawn as Emma stood holding the baby. She whispered, "They will remember me not for what I was, but for what they made me." Daniel stood near, his voice low, "You are more than their whispers." Margaret approached, her steps heavy, whispering, You are my daughter, and I failed you." Emma's jaw tightened as she muttered, "I was never yours to fail. I was mine all along." The villagers lingered on the edges, eyes watching, waiting for her to break. Emma's eyes lifted, her voice rising. "I will not be their shame. I will not be erased." Daniel whispered, "You've already broken the chains." Margaret sobbed softly, whispering, "I pray you never need me again." Emma's tears shimmered, her voice sharp. "I no longer need your permission to live." Emma sat in the church pew, the baby asleep against her chest. Her whisper carried through the empty chapel. "I never wanted to be a mother, yet he calls me one without words." Daniel stood at the altar, his voice quiet. "Maybe he chose you when no one else did." Margaret lingered at the back, whispering, "The church forgives even when the people do not." Emma turned sharply, whispering, "Forgiveness is not mine to ask, it is his to give." Daniel's eyes softened, saying, "He already forgave you the moment he held on to you." The candles flickered, shadows stretching like memories of pain. Emma's voice cracked. "Then maybe I can forgive myself." Margaret lowered her head, whispering, "Then I will carry the guilt alone." Emma closed her eyes, whispering, "Carry it, but it will not define me anymore." The house felt still as Emma packed a small bag, her hands trembling yet steady. She whispered, "If I stay, I remain a ghost. If I leave, I begin again." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, whispering, "Wherever you go, I will walk with you." Emma turned, her eyes red, whispering, "You cannot promise me a life free of pain." Daniel's voice cracked, "I promise you a life where you will not be alone." Margaret entered quietly, her voice breaking, "If you leave, let me see him once more." Emma hesitated, then slowly turned, holding the baby toward her mother. Margaret kissed his forehead, whispering, "I pray he never knows the weight of silence." Emma's tears fell, whispering, "Then I will raise him in truth, even if it destroys me." Daniel whispered, "Truth is the only foundation we have left." Emma stood on the hill outside town, the wind lifting her hair as she gazed into the distance. She whispered, "This land holds my pain, but beyond it may lie peace." Daniel stood at her side, voice steady, "Peace is not found, Emma, it is built." Emma looked down at the baby, whispering, "Then I will build it for him, even if it costs me everything." Margaret approached slowly, whispering, "Do not go without knowing I regret every breath I used to silence you." Emma turned, her voice sharp, "Regret will not heal me, but truth might." Daniel whispered, "Then let truth be our compass." Emma pressed the baby close, whispering, "You will never grow up chained to lies." Margaret's tears streamed as she whispered, "Then you have already done what I never could." The night was still as Emma walked down the empty road, Daniel at her side, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. She whispered, "They tried to strip me of everything, but they could not take him." Daniel's voice trembled, "He will always know who you are, Emma." She pressed her cheek against the child's head, whispering, "Even if I break, he will carry my love." Margaret watched from the distance, her tears glistening in the moonlight as she whispered to herself, "I never wanted her to bear it, yet she bore it all." Emma's steps slowed, her whisper sharp, "I will not vanish into silence. I will be remembered." Daniel said softly, "Not for pain, but for strength." Emma's eyes closed as she whispered, "Then let my strength be his forever." The road stretched endlessly, but her voice lingered like a vow.